welcome to Real People, Real Business, the podcast where we invite entrepreneurs and business people to come and tell us their stories of how they became successful in their ventures. We hear the good, the bad, the ugly, and they inspire us to do better, and we can always learn from them. On today's episode, I have an amazing young lady. She's the VP of HR for PSA BDP. She's also the CEO and co-founder of the All Africa Festival, which is the biggest African festival in the Middle East. She leads leadership development. She helps businesses drive strategy through people, and she's also an empathy equity builder. She's worked in Europe, Middle East and North Africa, East Africa, and West Africa. Nina Olatoke, welcome to Real People, Real Business.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Fantastic. It's a pleasure having you on, and I'm excited to hear your story. Before we start, I've got two questions. I've got two things I've got to say. One, I love the haircut.
Oh, thank you.
Amazing. And the second one, before we start, what is an empathy equity builder?
An empathy equity builder, I mean, it was a term that myself and my boss, who I absolutely love and a huge fan of, came up with. And we were trying to figure out a way in this world today, when you use things like emotional intelligence and all of that, from an executive perspective, people always see that as a gimmick on one of these things you want to do. But from a business perspective, but also from an individual perspective, the reason why you want to build that kind of intelligence or really have empathy is really for it to equate to some kind of equity. And that equity could be discretionary effort from a work perspective or individual perspective. That equity could also lead to financial growth. So really putting tangible value behind why empathy in itself could be a source to drive change, but also a source to grow revenue.
Fantastic. So that's essentially making it real. Empathy can actually help your business in real life terms. That's great. I'll start using that term myself. Cool. So let's go into your story. Okay. So you currently work as a HR VP of HR for a large international company that's based around the world and here in the UAE. How did you find your way into HR? Did you always have a passion for people? Was that something that you planned out, early on, saying I'm going to go into HR?
Yeah. I think growing up, I've always been a people person, right? And I remember myself in secondary school in command and being the social prefect and acting plays and drama and all of those kind of things and coming up with dances and stuff. So I think I've always been a people person. Yeah. HR was a beautiful mistake, for lack of a better word. I wanted to study law. I've always been and still am fascinated with criminal law. And I think I got to a point through my studies where I realized, oh my gosh, I couldn't defend someone that I thought had committed a crime, because I have a huge balance. I have a philosophy I live by, which is equally fair, equally unfair. And for me, there has to be equity at every level. So then I got into payroll, is actually how I started my HR career. My sister-in-law, which is one of the smartest women I know, was like, oh, you know what, there's this thing called payroll. You could teach yourself and you can learn how to do this, which is quite an irony because I was really bad at math. I was a science student that hated math. So, and payroll is all about calculations. But I think when it got to people's money and stuff like that, it was easier for me to understand it because I could make it real. And then from there, I got into compensation and benefits, became a CMB consultant, did pretty well in that field, and consulted with companies like PwC, Convergys, Cantor Fitzgerald. So really good in that. And then through that way, stumbled into HR and found my career passion and my career love. So that's how I grew into the career I have today.
Fantastic. Great to hear, because sometimes we don't know where the path is going to take us, but being open to learning like you did with payroll can actually progress you in a direction where you can get to be strong as you've done. Now, in your role as a HR director, you don't just you're not just a people manager. You also have this skill set of leadership development, which you work with a lot of leaders to get them to do what's right for the companies they work for and the people that follow them. I mean, tell me about a little bit more about this. Have you had challenges or struggles in getting HR working right within the leadership and the people who work for the company?
Absolutely. And I wouldn't even say call them challenges per se. I'll just say a lot of times people don't know what they don't know. The more exciting part of my job is probably the part that a lot of people hate, which is usually being direct about leadership, about the behaviors that they need to, adapt to move things forward. And usually sometimes can be quite an uncomfortable conversation. I think the way I approach it is I always have this theory in life that people are inherently good. Somebody wakes up in the morning and the first thought on their mind is not how am I going to mess someone else's day up. Really, it's really about how am I going to have a productive day. Now there is probably a 1.52% that is their first thought. But if you think of the majority of humans that are working the earth, that are trying to just create spaces for them to exist and create spaces for them to succeed and create spaces for them to be able to provide for themselves, their lives, their family. If you look at it from that approach, then you look at it as every leader that does something that rubs someone out the wrong way is not from an intentional perspective. However, how do you then create the course correct of that? How do you give feedback, right, that is constructive, not destructive? How do you address those kind of situations? And I think over the years I have been I've learned the knack of that because a lot of my role really focuses on, growing the leaders of tomorrow for the organization and the business, looking at leadership across the board within the organization, putting policies in place that help employees, obviously, absolutely. But again, people don't leave companies, they leave leaders. So how do we secure that?
Absolutely. And I want to stay on this point a little bit because I think leadership is super, super important, especially for people who want to go into running their own businesses. Even if you started as a one-man band, at some point you're going to be hiring people to support your business. And like you said, people don't leave the companies, they leave the leadership. So how do you work with leaders? You give me an example. If you found a leader that is not doing the right thing, the approach, for other HR people who might be listening to this, how do they approach that leader and get them to sort of pivot or evolve into a more empathetic leader? Or even, like you said, they might not be aware. And I feel like sometimes leaders, because they're not necessarily checked, whoever's checking them is probably above them sitting in the board of directors. The egos may come into place, like, how do you tell me how to behave? I'm leading this company. So how do you get to that point where you get that sort of person to listen, see what you're trying to say, and potentially grow and evolve them to the empathetic leader that they should be?
I think I have a great book that I read at least twice a year, and the book is titled "Ego is the Enemy" by Ryan Holiday. Even as me personally, it has helped me put my own self in check sometimes when I come to those kind of conversations where I see my ego coming out to play. But in the terms of leadership and how I help support them, I think the first thing you have to give leaders is insight, right? Insight that they can trust. So in my career, there's so many different tools out there. One of the ones that I have followed quite religiously and I'm certified in is the Hogan assessment. It's one of those that tells you who you are as a holistic person, 100% by the feedback you provide on yourself. And it has 3 aspects to it. So it has the bright side, and the bright side is you at your best, you when you're highly engaged, highly motivated, and the kind of things that drive you. It talks about your value side, which is the things that really mean the most to you and how you're motivated. And there's no good, bad, or ugly about this report. It's really just a 360 on you. And some people are financially motivated, some people are family motivated, some people are motivated by friendships, some people are motivated by equity and a balance and relationship and all of those kind of things, and those are important. But my favorite part of the report is the dark side. And the dark side basically tells you at your worst. And usually you at your worst comes out when something triggers to your value side, right? And also stress. So I think one of the things I start with leaders is at least giving them the insight to understand who they are, right? So it's not a case of Nina is psychoanalyzing me. It is a here are the characteristics you're portraying. So how do we have conversations about this? And one of the things I've also realized with leaders is feedback has to be kind, right? So, and sometimes I'm not my kindest self. So I also have to wait for the right timing to be able to give that. But 9 out of 10, I've never had a leader, very few leaders, should I say, in my career where I have called out about particular behavior where they weren't like, oh my gosh, okay, I didn't notice that. Or where they'll be like, sorry, and try and course correct. But I think one thing we have to remember is behaviors learned over time. And I think sometimes what frustrates people is I've given you the feedback the first time, the second time, the third time, but this is still happening on and off. And I say what you have to recognize is the frequency of how it's happening. So if something was happening on a daily basis and now it's happening twice a week and now it's happening, twice every 2 weeks, and now it's happening 3 times a month, and then you will never get to a point that person is 100% of that behavior. But you have to acknowledge the progress that people are trying to make to be better.
No, I totally agree. It's we may never get, it's part of who you are, right? It's about managing those triggers like you mentioned. When we were speaking earlier, and I think this is an important point for leaders, because they are human beings, they do have feelings, and if someone comes to them and says, hey, I think you're doing a bad job in how you're managing people, you will get defensive. You did mention something which was this circle of trust.
Absolutely.
All right, and what is that? Why should a leader have a circle of trust? So anyone else who's out there who's in a leadership position, I'd like them to understand what this is and why it's important to the way they lead.
I mean, absolutely, every leader should have a circle of trust. And that circle of trust, depending on where you are in your empathy journey, could be people that report directly to you and can call you out. Could be people in the same peer sort of leadership role as yourself. Or it could be someone like me who's in HR that says, you know what, this is not right. And it could be people in senior positions to you. But I think the circle of trust really builds on the premise that there are people that you have in the organization that will tell you exactly where you're off. And again, the feedback has to come with kindness, constructive and not destructive, because it's very easy to break that circle of trust sort of situation if every time the feedback is naggy, right? So it's getting that fair balance. Absolutely. I have to say that I'm lucky enough to work in a team that has quite a strong circle of trust. Fantastic. So if I behave in a way, somebody is going to tell me.
They'll call you on it.
Somebody's going to call me on it.
They'll let you know.
They'll let me know. But also, even if I saw someone in my circle of trust that behaved a certain way, I would also call them out. And it's beautiful to know that there is that safety and security. Absolutely. That extends through. And even that circle of trust could even extend to things like, okay, we're having this meeting. Here's how I wanted to convey my messaging. Can you let me know if that's what you got from the way I presented? How was my presentation? How did I? And it goes beyond just, a slap on the wrist. It even goes beyond, well done. Yeah. You did an amazing job with that. You portrayed the message exactly you wanted to, or well done. You did an amazing job. You portrayed the message. I think you should have added X, Y, Z. So it's more than just the people that slap you on the wrist when you do something wrong. It's also the people that energize you to keep you going. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And I think, it's critical that leaders, if they want to do a good job, put the ego aside, having a circle of trust, people you can go to and speak to human and get the insights can only improve you as a leader, right?
And I think over the years, people, the role of the ego is important because your ego in a way acts as fuel, like an accelerant for your dreams, where you want to go. How there is, we all have that, oh, I can be the person that could, right? Yeah. And that is, in a way, yes, progressive, but that's also ego fueled. So your ego has a role to be the fuel. What your ego shouldn't be is the barrier that actually stops your fuel from moving. And I think sometimes with leadership, the higher you get, the bigger the ego, the bigger the fuel, but then the more the barrier gets created.
That's interesting. Fantastic. Okay, so I want to move on to the next point, which is, since moving to the UAE with your current company, you've also launched an amazing festival, and you now straddle full-time employment with this festival that you run every year.
Yeah.
And it's one of the largest African festivals in the Middle East. How are you, before you tell us about the festival and what it stands for and what you're trying to promote, I want to understand how you manage both. How do you straddle both of them, full-time employment, family, children, and then a big event that happens every year?
Yeah. I think in terms of how I straddle all of that, I think I'm going to first start to say that I feel like the luckiest woman on earth. I have a fantastic partner that is really a partner through life and supports me in everything that I do, and actually helps me together create spaces that allow me to be my true self and explore my adventures. So that's the first step. The second step is that I feel like I won the lottery with my employer, who's PSA BDP. It's the longest company I've ever worked with, but also it is the only company in my 20 plus career that I have ever been able to be my authentic self. I walk into spaces where and as authentic as I can be, being a vice president of HR, because there are some things that you shouldn't bring with you. But as authentic as I can be in the role that I have, I feel so privileged and blessed to work for an organization that accepts me and expects me to be me. There's a difference from an acceptance, and then there's a difference from an expectation. Right? Expects me to be me. I started the festival as a small thing, starting off, first of all, in 2018 in a different format than what it is today. The support was phenomenal, particularly when I told the organization of what the festival was doing and everything. I got celebrated internally. I got celebrated on bulletins and everything else. And I think because of the work I was doing on the festival, when the organization was looking for someone to actually head DEI globally, the CEO,
and just for our guests, DEI is diversity,
equity, and inclusion.
Yes.
So diversity, equity, and inclusion. We wanted to do something very unique in this space. We didn't want to do a tick in the box. We talked about it for so many years. And when the company was ready to give that role to someone, the role had been open in the organization for about 7 to 9 months at this point. And the CEO spoke to my boss and said, the reason why we can't find someone or we can't think of someone to do this is because we have the perfect person to do this already in the organization, which is Nina, with what she's doing with the festival and all of those things. And more importantly, the ethos around the festival and the thinking behind it. But because they had created spaces for me to be my authentic self at work, everybody knew about it. Everybody was excited about the energy I was building around it. So through being my authentic self, I actually got promoted and had additional responsibility for a place that is so passionate and dear to my heart. So I think if there's one thing I'm going to tell would-be entrepreneurs as they're building their companies, if you are a CEO or a company or in a big organization as a leader, creating spaces where people can be authentically themselves are powerful, because it increases the discretionary effort, but it also increases the passion and the connection and the empathy equity that you build with your employees, right? Yeah. And I have to say, over the years, because of the way my profile is risen and stuff, I have been approached by a lot of companies, fantastic offers on the table. But my equity empathy is with PSA BDP. Absolutely. And that has impacted a lot of the decisions I have made over the years.
Now that's fantastic, because especially in this post-COVID age, where, a lot of people start to think about, what's the equity I bring to myself as well as my company. It's the typical 9 to 5 and just I put all my loyalty into this one basket is not enough anymore. People start to look at, what am I outside of work? What else can I do outside of work? And I think it's just, it pays dividends to employers to say, yes, like you said, bring your authentic self in. Yeah, we recognize that, you might have other things you're doing outside of work, but as long as we can find a marriage between the two, why not encourage people to actually bring their full rounded self? I find that sometimes when you go into organizations that to work with those large organizations, you tend to have to leave a bit of your true self outside.
Yeah.
And, in this day and age, people don't really want to choose.
No, and I think COVID shook a lot of us, right? People have started to ask themselves, what is the meaning of life? What am I doing here? What impact am I having beyond a 9 to 5? And what else is there?
Fantastic. I love it. So, All Africa Festival.
Yes.
Tell us about the festival. Tell us why you're doing it. It's coming up next year, February. Tell us the acts, tell us your mission, tell us your story about this, because I think this is a phenomenal story to hear.
Yeah, thank you. So the All Africa Festival is really a festival that celebrates the holistic representation of Africa in her entirety, and that's a tall order. And we do it through the creative space, right? And one of the things we tell people is that Africa is not just a continent. Africa is her people, and her people are all over the world. And why that matters to us as we talk about the festival is because we celebrate African Continental Festival as well as diasporan cultures, right? So we celebrate Afro-American, Afro-European, Afro-Middle Eastern, Afro-Cuban, Ghanaian, Nigerian, Sudanese, Ethiopian.
Yeah.
I'm really excited about some of the partnerships we've built now as we are moving from Dubai for the last 2 years and moving into Abu Dhabi for 2nd to 4th of February 2024. I have to take it out and shout out to the UAE, this land that just embraces people like me that come in here and people like me that want to make a difference and an impact with something like this.
Yes.
Moving to Abu Dhabi, we have the support of DCT, which is the Department of Culture and Tourism in Abu Dhabi, as well as a huge brand like Miral. The event is going to be on Yes Island, the first African festival to be in Etihad Park.
Fantastic.
We have partnerships with UAE Africa Connect that is really trying to synergize the cultural connectivity between the UAE culture and the African culture, which is beautiful. I'm happy to announce that as of today, before I came, I did a recording for Ethiopian Broadcasting Corporation.
Fantastic.
And they're coming on board as one of our big media partners. So one of the giants of Africa from a media perspective is going to be really showcasing the culture as well on the continent and here to their people. The uniqueness about the festival is really about celebrating African culture through food, music, entertainment, art, fashion. And what we want to do is create spaces where some of the misconceptions as to what it is and what it means to be African can be
obliterated.
Exactly. Where we can open up this dialogue. I mean, sometimes when people say Africa, they think black, and I'm like, no, Africa actually has all the races. We're not just black, right?
Yeah.
We're not just black, we're white.
Yeah.
There's also Asian culture in Africa, and you can say, what is based on immigration from 3 generations, but these are Africans. They're part of that African story and the welcome and the mixedness of our culture. You talk about African American culture, and the first thing people talk about is slavery, but there's a whole different mix in that culture.
Yeah.
If you watch High on the Hog, mac and cheese came through the whole African American culture. The staple mac and cheese everybody loves to eat came through African American culture. There's so much beauty. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say we forget the stories and the struggle and the strife, but through that and through the perseverance of the culture and the people and the history, there is so much beauty. And I think sometimes we tell the narrative of Africa from a one-dimensional perspective. And we have to open it up to the reality of the beauty that exists.
Yeah. Now I see where you're going with the point that Africa is not just a place, it's her people. You know, like you said, the whole diversity is there. We have Asian Africans, we have Arab Africans, you know, the culture goes across the world, you know. I think the other day I was reading there's an African community like who's been in India for decades, you know, even centuries, you know. So you know, Africa is the cradle of humanity, as they say.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's great that we can see a sort of unique oneness across this festival like this.
I mean, part of the things we do with the festival, so I always say that we wanted to have cultural impact. So if you walk around the festival, there'll be posters and stuff all around. And the kind of stories we tell are like Septimus Severus, who was a Roman emperor in Britain and actually built the great walls of the city of London to keep the Scots out, was an African Roman emperor.
Yep. Yeah.
We tell the stories of Yakuza, who was the first non-Jamaican samurai, was an African descendant.
I believe that was Yasuke.
Yasuke,
there should be a movie coming out on that.
Yeah. So we tell his story as well, and we tell the story of the fact that, I mean, between when you say we're in Africa, the Sudanese claim him, the Nigerians claim him, the Angolans claim, everybody's saying he came from...
We'll figure it out later.
Matter. It doesn't matter. The point is he came from the continent, right? We have, you know, people who have been... the history is so beautiful. And when you start to look at those aspects of it, as opposed to just the one-dimensional negative narrative, and even today, right? Even today, for people who don't know the continent that well or who don't know the people that well, you know, you speak to them and they say, oh, there's, you know, a lot of poverty, hunger, strife, and famine. And while all of those things are true, but there's also a lot of beauty and greatness.
Yeah.
I usually don't like to talk about Afrobeats and single it out because I have mixed emotions about that. I love what Afrobeat is doing from a global perspective, but I also am like, okay, we're not telling the music story correctly because now everything African is Afrobeat and it's not Afrobeat.
Hundreds of musical genres.
There's hundreds of musical genres. We even have soca.
Yeah.
Like there's so much musical genres. So there's this part of me that's like, yay, as a Nigerian, go Afrobeat. And then as an African, I'm like, we have other music genres. So, but even with that and what we're trying to do in that space, it's beautiful. So the festival is really about, and culture is always, I think sometimes people, they diminish the power that culture has to change perceptions.
Yes.
I actually think that it's our most powerful tool if we want to get people to understand us. And more importantly, we want to understand ourselves because even sometimes Africans, we are so ignorant about our culture as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So, yeah.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, it's really amazing that you're doing something like this in the Middle East. It does bring that dimension of us seeing the culture as a whole in all its fragments and presenting that to the world. So this year, it's been held at Yas Island, and previous years it's been held in Dubai. You know, how are people who are in Dubai and other parts of the UAE going to get to, you know, to Yas Island to attend this, you know, because, you know, some people are used to seeing it. This is your third year running. Some people are used to seeing it in Dubai previous years. So, you know, are you going to be helping people to get up to Abu Dhabi?
Absolutely. So we've taken that into consideration. But again, I can't stress this more, the partnership with and the support from DCT and Miral. So one of the things we're going to be putting in place is looking at transportation locations. So if people have a ticket to the festival, we will be announcing towards the end of February different pickup spots where they can take an All Africa Festival bus from Dubai, from Alan, I think from Sharjah as well, are the 3 locations. And we're going to open up a wait list. So based on the wait list and some of the information, we're probably going to expand that to other Emirates. Yeah. But if they have a ticket to the All Africa Festival, it's going to be a super discounted rate. I think it's going to be about 30 dirhams for a return bus fare.
Okay, it's reasonable.
Basically to Yas Island, to Etihad Park and back for the festival.
Okay, fantastic. And
then we're also going to have opportunities for people to make this a weekend staycation because the biggest thing I get asked when I tell people we're going to be providing buses, is the next thing I get asked is, so which day, if we want to do one day, I'm like, no, that's like asking a parent to choose their favorite child. Like, all the 3 days. The 3 days are phenomenal. Yeah. And we're going to have artists like Diamond Platinum, who we've already announced. I'm only going to mention the artists that we've announced. So we have Diamond Platinum. We have Nora Fatih from Morocco, who's a huge, huge star, but also huge within the Indian and the Pakistani culture as well. So she's been able to make that transition, right? We're going to be having artists like Stowboy from Ghana. We're going to be having Lij Mike from Ethiopia, and he's one of the biggest Ethiopian acts coming out. So we're really, really excited about. We're going to have Halem from Sudan. You know, we have so many artists coming through. And for all of this, we're really, really excited. I mean, we also have El Grande Toto as well from Morocco. And El Grande Toto is the famous artist that did the song with CK, the Afrobeats artist from Nigeria, where he did the Arabic twist of that song. So that's exciting. We've announced Vega Dream, who sang the World Cup for France like 3 years or 4 years ago. That was a big sensation on the internet. So I'm trying to carefully not let anything out of the bag as I'm name dropping artists. But we still have artists to announce from Afro beats genre, Amapiano genre. We still have artists from the high life genre. We still have artists from the African American genre, the grime genre as well. And we're going to be having some, local DJs as well as international DJs to keep the scene going. RJ, the best DJ, is coming back again, and RJ is always a favorite for our event. So a lot of surprises.
So at this stage, Nina is plugging the event. So you can definitely, I know the tickets are available on Ticketmaster.
Ticketmaster and
Platinum List. So Nina, it's an amazing event. It's big. You've got some major sponsors behind you, supporting you. But I know that getting this event off the ground has not been easy for you. I know it's been challenging. I was there when you were pushing it for last year. It was, you had some last minute changes where a bunch of artists could not make it in. And I know you were thinking about canceling the event, postponing those refunds. I know I spoke to you right after the event and you said, Izu, I don't know if I can do this again. I'm drained. I need a month or two off to rethink what I want to do. And I said, this is a massive event. It's bigger than you. And we need it. And I want you to tell us what that's like, what those challenges are and how you're able to go past it and come back with this renewed energy for the third year in a row. Yeah. And still push even bigger and better now with more sponsors.
Honestly, I think what last year taught me, people would ask me, what do you think? And I'm like, I'm a resilient person. I'm so resilient. I think last year taught me that I have a different level of resilience coming out of that festival. And in all honesty, I think it took a certain level of tenacity, support, but stubbornness for me to go through that festival last year. A week to the event, a lot of our artists couldn't make it for reasons beyond our control. We had sponsors pull out. A lot of these artists that couldn't make it were, based on one part of the African story, and while quite a significant part, but still one part. And I think the decision that I was met with was, I think, a decision that has led to the support as well that we're getting from our partners for the next event. I had to ask myself a question. Could I truly call this the All Africa Festival if, due to a certain portion of that definition of All Africa couldn't make it, and then it will have huge financial impact? How do I tell this story? And because I couldn't tell how I could tell that story, and it had to stay unique to what the brand represented, we went ahead with it. But you're right, because after going ahead with it, there was a time where I felt, okay, this was the last hurrah. And I remember on the last day of the festival, coming out, telling the audience bye after the last performance and doing like a round off and saying, see you next time. And I choked when I said see you next time, because there was a piece of me that asked myself, do I really
Would there be a next time?
Would there be a next time? Just based on some of, I mean, you can imagine, and to give context to what I'm trying to delicately say, you can imagine losing about 65-70% of your sponsorship 1 week to an event.
Wow.
And that's what that was.
Wow.
So, but we went ahead, we pulled through.
Yeah.
I saw you immediately after the event, and I was like, I don't know, I just need a month.
Yeah.
But in all of that, I have to say the support I have gotten from the UAE, the land, the people in the places of power and influence, and you know, just having this now move to Abu Dhabi was sometimes you're going through the journey, but you have these pockets of reassurance that show up.
Yeah.
Abu Dhabi was a pocket of reassurance because, and in hindsight, I want to say thank you to Imar and the support they gave us to get this off the ground for the first 2 years of the festival in this format.
Yeah.
If I look at the festival in its entirety and what it's trying to represent from a cultural perspective, it's more culture than entertainment. And it's really about telling stories and narratives. And I feel that the move to the capital is the right move for something like this. And it shows in the support we're getting.
Fantastic. I'm really glad that was not the last hurrah. I'm really glad that, you know, it's coming back next year. And, you know, it's great that you've learned that resilience. I think that's one thing I see with a lot of entrepreneurs. You sometimes don't know your own strength. You come against these brick walls and you think that might be the end of it. But, you know, with support, and that's why I said mentorship and coaching and having a support structure is always important as an entrepreneur. People that you can go to and say, I'm weak, I'm tired, you know, just get me through to the next pockets of success, like you said, and then the energy comes back. So that's really amazing to hear that that you went through that, but you came out even more resilient than ever.
And I think the biggest lesson I learned through that was, so as Africans and as women, right, we are raised in this, you always have to be strong, you always have to put it together, you always have to smile through the pain. And even as African men have that pressure on their shoulders as well. You know, you have to be the head of the house, you have to you have to put on this mask. I learned the power and the release of honesty.
Yeah.
Through this event last year.
Yeah.
When people that I felt, you know, some kind of level were close to me, and sometimes maybe even not. And if people said, you know, how are you doing? And I said, I'm just coping.
Yes.
I'm coping.
Yes.
Or they said, you know, I'm like not great. I'm trying to figure out what the next move is, what the next step is. And I think that power of honesty and not like smiling and, oh, everything's okay, it's all good, it's all perfect. I think that in itself was a release of pressure for me.
Yeah.
And, you know, there were some people that were like, oh my gosh, what can we do to help? And then, you know, there's some people that turn you to the word on the street is.
Yeah.
But for me at that point, it didn't matter any of those narratives.
Yeah.
It mattered that I had that honesty in myself. And I think that honesty had a power to it to move to the next phase. Because then I could have honest, open conversations with, this is where I see the vision going.
Yeah.
However, I need help.
Exactly. I think you're right. That honesty allows you to ask for help. And if you don't put yourself in a space where you can receive help, then you will never get it. You know, people just think you're doing okay and ignore you. So that's one thing I've learned myself as well, is to sometimes turn around and say, listen, I need help here. Can someone support and not be so too strong for your own good?
Yes.
You know, this now dovetails nicely into the next section of the podcast and the interview, which is, you know, where you share your wisdom.
Yep.
So this is based on 3 questions I ask everyone. And the first question is, what's the most surprising fact that you've learned about yourself in terms of your entire journey with your career? And I think maybe even more profoundly with the festival.
I think more profoundly with the festival. I think 3 key most important things I've learned about myself. I think One is I don't always have to wear this armor, right?
You can be vulnerable.
I can be vulnerable. There's power in vulnerability. I think that's one. There is power in vulnerability. I talk about my boss, Marsha Lissy, a lot, and I'm going to mention her on this podcast. But Marsha always says, and two people do this to me, actually, Marsha and my best friend, Alex. When I smile, they're like, so tell us the emotion behind that smile. They can see it. And they're like, you know what, you don't always have to be strong. You don't always have to be. So I think the power in vulnerability is one I have learned.
Yeah.
Because I felt like for so long I've always had to have an armor.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was key.
Fantastic.
I think the second thing is I've learned that there is always another level of tenacity behind every person. When you think like, I can't do more, I can't, yeah, there's another level. There's another level of, I've realized that I'm stronger than I think I am. I've realized that I'm more tenacious than I think I am. And I think the third thing is, so my partner always cracks and says, "You're so stubborn." I now believe him. I am stubborn.
And I've been a witness to that. Just a few moments ago, about 20 minutes ago, I actually I witnessed that straight away. He was like, "You shouldn't be doing this." I'm just going to do it anyway. So
yeah, I think he's going to be happy about that one. I accept I am stubborn.
Yeah. Cool. Sometimes it's a driver, right?
It's
sometimes
a driver,
it goes.
sometimes, yeah.
Okay, and going into the next second question, which is, what do you consider to be successful?
I think for me, particularly looking at the journey I went through in the last year, embracing failure is success. Trying, just try. I think sometimes we try only because we know that it's going to be good, or we try only because we know we're going to succeed. I think last year, I have to say, in all the time I've been doing this, probably last year was the 1 year I wasn't secure in my trying. However, if I hadn't tried last year, I wouldn't be talking with Abu Dhabi for the festival in Abu Dhabi, because as painful as I thought that experience was, there were a lot of people that came from DCT to actually witness that. And that understanding the challenges the festival went through and delivered that is what has given us the springboard to go into the next event.
Yeah.
So just trying. And I always say that, people if my life was to end today or tomorrow, I think I would have less regrets, because most things that I have wanted to do, no matter how crazy they are, I have tried. I think the one thing that I still need to do that I keep talking about that I haven't done is skydiving. So I need to skydive.
Well,
I think that's the only
you're
thing.
You're definitely in the town for it.
I'm in the town for it, right? Skydiving is probably the only thing on that list, but everything I've tried.
Yeah.
And I think, and if I want to be completely honest, I've tried things that I knew that I had a higher chance that I will succeed in.
Yeah.
Last year was the first time I tried something and I knew that this could, just based on everything happening, I wasn't sure if this was going to happen again.
Yeah.
I've embraced failure. Failure is beautiful. It's beautiful. I think it's a win to try and fail than not to try at all.
As poetically said, not being afraid to try and just doing it, embrace failure. That's fantastic. And the final question is, what advice would you give to others who are in similar situations like yourself, who potentially straddle between having a full-time job and having a mega project, or wanting to do something outside of work that may bring them some fulfillment or even an additional income stream? How would you advise them to go about it?
I think my advice is going to be two ways. So the first thing is I'm going to advise companies and leaders in companies first and say, please create spaces for people to show up in their authentic selves. Because through that, you have no idea the person that you are unleashing, not only to your organization, but into the world around them. The grave is filled with so many lost hopes and dreams that were never even tapped into. And I know sometimes organizations think, is this person going to be distracted? Is this going to be that? The empathy equity you build with that is huge. Create spaces for people to be their authentic self. They bring some of that magic into work every day.
Yeah.
And then for people that are in positions like me, I'm like, don't be afraid to walk in your space. Now, there's a reality that I know at some point with the way the festival is doing, what decisions would I make in future? And to be fair, I think I've already made those decisions. I'm going to find a strategic team that's going to run the festival while I'm able to do the two things that really, really strengthen me and make me Nina, who I am, because those two things I love. So I would say that show up as yourself.
Yeah.
A little of yourself every day.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we talk about corporates not giving opportunities for people to do this, but sometimes we're also stuck in our heads that we don't even test if this is possible.
Yes. Yes.
Right? And maybe eventually you might need to leave to an organization that allows you both. But until you can categorically say the organization I'm in doesn't allow me both,
Yes.
without you testing that premise,
Yes.
then you can't just say, you can't say, well, financial industry doesn't allow, blah, blah, blah. Well, who knows?
Yeah. You
Right?
gotta try it out.
You have to try it out.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying go home one day as this person and come the next day as the other person. Like, you will have HR conversations at that point. But test it out a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
Test it out and just see whether you can be both of those people.
Yes.
And even if you want to pick one after the other, sometimes it's a journey, it's not a sprint. Because you have to ensure that you're being able to support yourself in whatever this passion is before you can turn off what pays the day to day. But I would say just test it.
Yes.
Before you assume it wouldn't work,
Yes.
test it. And then if it doesn't work, find spaces that allow you to be both.
Fantastic. So you heard it there. If you're a leader, if you run a company, create a space for people to come and be their authentic self. And if you're trying to, as an employee, looking to sort of move into a separate space, test it out with your current company, and you never know, it might just work. Nina, thank you so much for sharing your story. I am definitely looking forward to the All Africa Festival in Abu Dhabi. Hopefully I'll get some free tickets. But thank you so much. I follow this story, and I know the passion that you have for this, and I can only wish you the best of success. And I know this festival is going to be run into year 4 and year 5. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Fantastic.